Hello all. I'm going to have a quick chat about the 2022 film Barbarian. It's been quite a divisive movie from what I understand. I would say I enjoyed it. I've got a pretty low bar for horror films anyway, so that may not be a great way to judge. Yeah, it didn't scare me, but again, horror films don't really scare me that often. I might do a video of the ones that scared me at some point. It's going to be a very difficult film to talk about, so I'll say now there's going to be spoilers. It's impossible to talk about this film without spoilers. The basic premise is a young woman goes to an Airbnb because she's got an interview the next day, and when she arrives, she discovers there's a young man already inside, and much weird shit follows. I thought the acting was good, there was a nice creepy atmosphere, and an interesting and original idea. It was a reasonably effective horror film. That's about as much as I can say without spoiling it. I'm not going to go through the story, but let's just say that Tess goes into the basement, gets locked in, finds a secret door beyond which there's a room with a camera and a bed and a bucket. And then there's another secret door which leads down into caverns where a monster basically lives. I get a strong feeling there's a subtext within this film about the issues women face. And that's cool, and it's very often done really well. Unfortunately, every so often the subtext comes to the surface, and for me it affected certain things that were happening. So characters seem to make illogical choices. I mean, at one point it's literally not subtext, it's literally someone saying something, and I think within the context of the conversation it works, but it kind of underlines a lot of what's going on in the film. So Keith, who's the chap who's in the Airbnb already, is very, very creepy, and he's trying not to be creepy to try and make Tess feel at ease. And I understand that. And they try and explain why Tess stays. I don't think it was a particularly convincing reason, because I'd have thought she'd have run a mile, given what this guy's like. And I understand the conversational point that if she had been in the house first, she wouldn't have let him in, and the difference between the genders in that setup. And I understand that they were going for this idea that there's something wrong with him, that he is going to be the antagonist in the film, so that when they subvert expectations, it kind of works really well. I think they just went a little too far with it. Certainly at a point where Tess discovers the space downstairs, that he gets her out of the cellar because she's locked in, and she's telling him to get out the house, get out the house. And his response is, I want to look for myself. It could be argued that was a standard horror movie trope, but I found it a bit jarring. I don't know how logical that was and how reasoned that was. It felt very much like it was there to kind of make the point of her not being listened to. And that's kind of echoed again a bit later in the film, where she's escaped, calls the police turn up and are completely dismissive of her. Now, I live in the UK, so I don't know how it works in the US, but I would have thought that if a young woman, dishevelled, covered in scratches, saying that somebody had died in a house and there was a problem there, would have generated more of a response. They kind of follow her but don't believe her. And again, I'm presuming that is echoing the experience of women not being believed by the police. It just felt very clunky and very, very on the nose, I suppose. It felt in that situation that wouldn't have happened. The police would have had to got involved. I feel they try and allude that it's because the house she's referring to is in such a bad area, and that they perhaps believe that she's on drugs or an alcoholic or an unreliable witness anyway. It just comes across as odd and a bit unbelievable. If unbelievable isn't a strange word to use as a negative for a horror film. But then even horror films have to have their own internal sense of logic and their own anchor. And given this is supposed to be set in the real world, those sort of things are a bit more troubling. I think it's far more successfully achieved with AJ, the character who owns the house, because he's introduced midway through the film kind of all of a sudden. It completely cuts the narrative. It opens with him being accused of something by a woman. I've got to be careful what words I use. I don't think YouTube likes certain words. He denies it, and then progressively people start turning against him. He loses his jobs, he loses his accountant. And it's played quite nicely because the woman who makes the accusation, I believe she kind of takes his job and he's dropped. So there's an element of which they play it quite nicely, because he seems so convincing that he definitely did not do this. He doesn't know where this accusation came from. And then it really nicely, a bit later on, shows you his character. And it's not just his actions, it's what happens afterwards. That he is actively being self-delusional. That he's convincing himself that the terrible thing that he actually did, he didn't do. And that really was cleverly played, I thought. And I think throughout there are these moments where that narrative and that subtext really works. It's just occasionally it interferes a little bit with the film. I think some people might also make something of the fact that the heroine of the piece is a young career-orientated woman and the monster is the mother figure, but I'll leave that for them to make. I mean, it could be completely wrong with my assessment that might not have been the subtext at all, but that's certainly how it felt to me. But overall, I enjoyed it. I can see why it was divisive because it goes beyond subverting expectations. They do make it explicit later on what happened in the room with the camera in it, but you don't actually see anything. There's a few gory kills. In fact, the only violence you graphically see is committed against men, which I presume was a very specific choice by the filmmakers. And obviously, like most horror films, it falls into the illogical. I mean, maybe that's why some of the choices they made, maybe the choices with Keith were about making him creepy, but I say a couple of times it felt it was more about the subtext than necessarily the situation. Anyway, I better leave that there because I am repeating myself. Please like and subscribe, and I'd be interested to hear your comments as to whether you think I'm a million miles off the bill with this one and reading something into it that's not there. As usual, my comic is available from my website and the link is in the description below. Thank you very much for listening and peace out.